You are listening to Loving BDSM Podcast, Episode 4. Today, we're talking about discovering and entering the BDSM lifestyle. So let's get a start. Hello everybody, John Brownstone here. Yes, I am real, I do exist, and just as Kayla promised, here I am. Welcome to the Loving BDSM Podcast. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for coming. The Loving BDSM Podcast is produced every Friday for your kinky pleasure and education, and show notes are found at kaylalords.com. Come back often, and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. All links are in the show notes. Now, let's get into the show. One of the main questions I am often asked is how I got started in BDSM. It actually goes back quite a ways to the days of dial-up and 14.4 modems. I was doing a web search, and I don't even remember what it was for at this point, but in that search, I came upon a website called Leather and Roses, a BDSM resource site. I was intrigued, and I began reading through it. The site is filled with articles on dominance. There are essays regarding submission. There is information on being an online dominant and submissive. There is BDSM poetry and information about BDSM and abuse. If ever there was a good way to stumble into finding BDSM, this was it. Also, to lighten the mood, there are also some funny pages with BDSM humor. The site is still up, but unfortunately, it hasn't been updated since late 2009. One would think that this catapulted me into the lifestyle at light speed, but it didn't. Actually, I put it out of my mind for quite some time. Fast forward a year later, and I found myself on a journaling site where I began writing. It was a mishmash of things about my life, some very early erotica, none of it BDSM though, poetry, and even a touch of political observations. In the years I wrote there, I began receiving messages from other people writing on the site asking if I was a dominant. I politely informed them that I was not. Shortly after, I began chatting with a woman on there who turned out to be a deme. I became her online submissive. I will say this much, I learned, and I learned a lot. As her online submissive, I was responsible for checking in with her both in the morning and again in the evening. At a minimum of 3 times a week we would chat online, talking about the tasks she had set for me and how I had done in accomplishing them. She also wanted to know what was going on in my life. At that time, too, I was going to the gym regularly, and I would update her on my workouts and the progress I was making. It was also through her that I learned about orgasm control. I was not allowed to orgasm without her permission, and only when she could hear me on the phone. This went on for about 8 months. It was then I realized that if anything, I really wasn't a submissive. At that time, we parted ways. I was still intrigued by the BDSM lifestyle and what I had learned, and from that I approached my wife and talked to her about BDSM. Her reaction was less than favorable. In fact, she was downright aghast. She informed me how disgusting it is, how she would never demean herself to be involved in anything like that, and I need to put it out of my mind. That's what I did. I buried that part of myself for a number of years. The downside to it was, in that time, I experienced feelings of unrest, mild depression, and a feeling of being unfulfilled. By burying my feelings, needs, and desires, it had a profoundly negative effect on my marriage. For me, I withdrew. What little communication we had spiraled downwards and became non-existent. There were power struggles and arguments between us. For her, she withdrew sexually and emotionally. We became no more than roommates, sharing a space to live. Again, sometime after that, I landed on another writing site. This time I began writing some erotica that had a light touch of dominance entwined in some of the stories. Again, I began getting messages from readers asking if I was a dom. This time, I responded differently. Yes. From that, I met Mahena. She was my first submissive. While we were predominantly online, she would often travel to where I lived for business, and we would meet. As her dom, there were tasks I would have her do that I expected. First, she created an online journal that was for my eyes only. She was to write in there about what her feelings were, things about her job, her family, her life in general, and her thoughts about the DS lifestyle. Each morning she would have a mantra that she was to say, and then another one before bedtime. Each afternoon we would talk on the phone at lunch. I had her send me pictures of all her clothes, and I would pick out her wardrobe each day. When she would come to visit, all her clothes that she packed were picked by me. I found the Gore books and I began reading them. I was pulled in and read them as fast as I could get my hands on them. Some of what I read became incorporated into our relationship. I branded Maena. Granted, it was a temporary tattoo that she would wear only when we were together, but it became a part of our dynamic at the time. It was empowering. I felt alive. For the first time in my life, I felt like the man I was meant to be. But most of all, it felt right, and it felt normal. We were sir and pet for almost a year. Her divorce was taking a toll on her, and we parted ways. I didn't hear from her for almost a year and a half. Then one day, I received an email from her, thanking me for all I did for her, how the things I did as her sir gave her the strength to push through her divorce and come out a better person. That was my first true taste of being in the BDSM lifestyle. From that, I knew there was no looking back for me. I began to dig through online resources, looking for more information. I learned about local munches and groups that met socially with people who actually lived the lifestyle 24/7. I found a local munch, and from that began attending once a month. My first time at the munch, I knew I had found my home. One time, the facilitator of the group was talking about how BDSM was more than just sexual. She spoke of a sub she had years ago who had problems with shyness. When she brought the sub to her first munch, she was tasked with greeting each person that came and asking them one thing about themselves. My eyes were opened and my mind was freed. The unease, depression, and the feeling of being unfulfilled vanished. It was from that I knew I could never be anything else than what I was meant to be. Shortly after, I asked my then wife for a divorce, moved out of the house, and I embraced the lifestyle. So that is how I found out about BDSM and how it eventually became a main part of my life. Thanks for listening. Keep it real, keep it kinky, and we'll see you next week.